Okay, let's dive right in. We've pulled together a really fascinating stack of sources today, and they're taking us way back. We're talking ancient Alexandria.
Hmm.
We're looking into this brilliant inventor, Heron of Alexandria, and honestly, some of his creations, even reading about them now, they just blow your mind.
They really do. And
Okay.
our mission today, essentially, is to tackle this historical puzzle. It seems like a paradox, right?
Yeah.
How could the world's first steam engine, and we're talking 2,000 years ago, how could that exist without, immediately kicking off some kind of industrial revolution?
Exactly. So we're going to use the whole context around it that kept it from, well, changing the world back then.
So Heron of Alexandria. The sources place him around 10 to 70 AD, a Greek scientist, inventor living and working in Alexandria, which was a real hub.
And the picture we get is of someone just incredibly inventive,
Hmm.
a true genius for his time.
Absolutely. And the really surprising thing, the core of our deep dive today, is this specific invention, the eolipile.
Right.
The sources are pretty clear this is widely considered the very first steam engine. Centuries before steam power really took hold in Europe.
It's kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So let's set the scene a bit more. What was Heron's world like? What kind of inventions were people actually seeing?
Well, think of Alexandria as this buzzing center of knowledge, engineering, innovation. And Heron seems to have been right at the cutting edge. His work wasn't hidden away, it was visible in
Ah,
public spaces, the theater, temples, apparently even impacting musical performances. He wasn't just focused on one little area.
and the examples the sources give are just wild. Like what sounds like the very first vending machine, an automaton.
Yeah, an automated holy water dispenser. You walk into a temple, pop a coin in a slot,
Huh.
it triggers a lever, and bam, you get a measured amount of holy water automatically. And one source even makes this wry comment, about how money and religion were tangled up even back then.
The coin-op machine.
Yeah.
2,000 years ago. That's just... Okay, what about the theater stuff? Automated theater.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about mechanical plays maybe 10 minutes long, and these weren't just static models.
No,
No, they used complex systems, pulleys, counterweights, rotating gears to make automatons move around on stage. They could even change the scenery automatically.
that is seriously advanced.
And there's even a hint that the mechanisms might have been, sophisticated enough to be reprogrammed for different shows.
That feels like something out of science fiction for that era. Imitating sounds, like thunder.
Yep. He built a device for that, too. Basically dropping metal balls onto a hidden drum to create a thunder effect for plays. It shows he was thinking about the whole sensory experience, the stagecraft.
And he was clearly experimenting with harnessing energy too, not just steam, right?
Definitely. There's this description of a musical organ powered by wind. A wind wheel driving a pump for the air supply. That's wind power. And other ingenious things, like temple doors designed to swing open automatically when you lit a fire on the altar, using heated water expansion, or even a cart that could move itself using ropes and falling weights.
These aren't just toys. I mean, they show a really deep grasp of mechanics, leverage,
Pneumatics, hydrodynamics.
Yeah.
Yeah. He understood how to build complex interacting systems.
which brings us back to the eolipile. You
Right.
said it was maybe his most profound invention conceptually.
In many ways, yes, because of what it represented.
Okay, so let's get into it. The eolipile, this ancient steam engine, how did it actually work based on the descriptions?
It was surprisingly simple in its basic form. Imagine a hollow sphere, maybe made of copper, balanced so it could spin easily.
Okay.
Then, sticking out from opposite sides, you have these two L-shaped tubes, kind of like little jets pointing in opposite directions.
Right.
Underneath the sphere, you have a container of water that you heat up maybe over a fire. That creates steam.
Mm-hmm.
The steam travels up into the sphere, finds its way out through those bent tubes, and as it shoots out,
It spins the sphere.
exactly, the reaction force, the thrust from the escaping steam, makes the sphere spin, apparently quite rapidly.
So just with that, he proved a fundamental principle.
Mm-hmm.
You can turn heat into motion, rotary motion.
Precisely. That was the key demonstration. Heat energy converted directly into movement. And this is where it gets puzzling.
Because
Because despite proving this, potentially revolutionary idea, the sources are clear. The eolipile wasn't really used for anything practical. It was seen more as a purely scientific curiosity.
a curiosity, like a teaching tool maybe.
Yeah, or something to demonstrate the properties of steam pressure, reaction forces, not for doing actual work, like grinding grain or pumping water on a large scale.
And that lands us squarely back on our main question. Why? With this device, this principle demonstrated, why didn't we see a steam-powered Roman Empire? Why no early industrial age?
It's the million denarius question, isn't it? And the sources we've looked at suggest it probably wasn't just one single thing. It was likely a mix of factors.
Okay, like what?
Technical problems. That seems to be part of it, yeah. The materials available back then are highlighted as a major constraint.
Right, you said it was likely made of copper.
Probably copper, maybe bronze. Now, think about the steam engines that drove the later Industrial Revolution. They needed strong materials, mainly iron and then steel, to handle really high steam pressures safely.
Higher pressure means more power.
Exactly. More power to do heavy work. Copper just wouldn't have been strong enough to build large, powerful, high-pressure steam engines. They would have likely, well, exploded.
Okay, makes sense. And fuel.
That's the other thing. Industrial steam power needed vast amounts of fuel, which eventually meant coal. While the Romans used some coal, they didn't have the massive coal mining infrastructure that developed later. Heating that pile probably used wood or charcoal, which is fine for a demonstration, but maybe not for industry.
So the basic science was there, but maybe the engineering materials and the fuel resources weren't quite ready for prime time, so to speak.
That seems to be a fair assessment of the technical limitations mentioned. But the sources point to something else, perhaps even more powerful, rooted in the very fabric of Roman society. Slavery. The sheer abundance and foundational role of slave labor in the Roman Empire.
Ah, okay. How big a factor was this, according to the sources?
It's presented as absolutely critical. One source makes this powerful comparison. The Roman world ran on slave labor like our modern world runs on oil.
Wow, that's a strong statement.
It is. Rome's constant wars and conquests meant a steady, cheap supply of enslaved people. And they powered everything: mines, farms, building projects, manufacturing, even household work, education, administration.
Everywhere.
Pretty much. It's noted that even Romans who weren't particularly wealthy could often afford at least one slave. It was just woven into the economic and social structure.
And there's that anecdote from Seneca that really drives home the scale of it.
Yeah, it's quite chilling. Seneca talks about a debate in the Roman Senate. Someone suggested making slaves wear distinctive clothes, so you could easily tell who was a slave.
Okay.
But the idea was rejected. Why? Because the senators apparently realized that if all the slaves in Rome could suddenly see just how numerous they were, well, they might figure out their collective strength and revolt.
That speaks volumes. Just the sheer numbers and the underlying fear.
It really does. And the sources are careful to note that conditions varied, of course.
Right, not all slavery was the same.
Exactly. In some urban households, perhaps, slaves might get educated, treated with a degree of respect, maybe even freed eventually, or allowed to earn money. But for many, especially those working in mines, on large agricultural estates, or in rougher businesses, life was brutal.
And there are some grim descriptions cited.
Yes, particularly from Cato the Elder. He was an influential Roman statesman, and his writings on managing estates included some pretty harsh advice on handling slaves. Like, basically treat them as tools, beat them if they mess up, execute one as a public warning if a crime is committed, and when they get old or sick and can't work effectively anymore, sell them off like worn-out equipment.
That's incredibly harsh.
It was. And the sources mention that even some other Romans thought Cato was excessively cruel, but his views likely reflected a widespread, cold, economic calculation about slave labor for many owners.
Okay, so bringing this back to Heron's invention, if you have this enormous pool of cheap, disposable human labor,
What's the real economic incentive to invest heavily in developing complicated, expensive, possibly unreliable machines to replace them?
the pressure just isn't there in the same way it was later.
That seems to be the core argument presented. Why spend a fortune on developing steam power when human muscle power is so readily available and costs so little to maintain, relatively speaking?
It changes the whole equation for innovation.
It really does. And it wasn't just a passive lack of incentive. There's even an account suggesting a conscious decision against adopting labor-saving tech.
Oh, tell me about that.
It comes from the historian Suetonius writing about the Emperor Vespasian. Apparently, an engineer came to Vespasian with a new invention.
Okay.
It was some kind of machine, a device that could transport heavy columns up to the Capitol in Rome much more cheaply than using gangs of laborers.
Sounds useful. Efficient.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
And Vespasian was reportedly impressed. He praised the engineer, gave him a reward for his cleverness, but he refused to actually use the invention.
Why on earth not?
His stated reason, according to Suetonius, was, You must let my poor commons have livelihood. Or basically, you have to let the poor earn their bread.
Wow. So he deliberately chose not to adopt a cost-saving technology because he was worried about unemployment.
That's exactly how the story is presented. It's a fascinating glimpse into Roman thinking. It shows an awareness right at the top that technological progress could displace workers and cause social unrest.
So it wasn't just the availability of slaves, but also a concern for keeping the free population employed, perhaps?
It suggests a complex picture, doesn't it? Maybe a desire to maintain social stability trumped pure economic efficiency in that case. It indicates that beyond the technical hurdles and the reliance on slave labor, there might have been active social or political reasons to resist automation.
So the environment just wasn't right for something like the Aeolipile to take off industrially.
That's the strong implication from piecing these sources together. The conditions weren't fertile for that kind of revolution.
The sources then briefly jump forward in time, right, over to when steam power did become a big deal.
Yeah, they provide a bit of context by mentioning the 17th century in Europe. That's when there was a major shift towards using coal as a primary fuel.
Which provided more heat, linking back to the technical needs.
Right, more intense, sustained heat needed for more powerful engines. And then you get figures like Thomas Savery around 1698. He developed a steam pump.
What was that for?
Its specific purpose was to pump water out of coal mines. This was a huge practical problem. As mines got deeper to get more coal, they flooded more easily. Savery's pump wasn't great, apparently was dangerous, tended to explode.
Oh, great.
Huh, yeah. But it was a start. And the key thing is, it addressed a pressing need. Over time, the pumps got better, safer, more efficient. This allowed mines to go deeper still, getting even more coal.
Which then fueled more steam engines for factories and transport. A feedback loop.
Exactly. It was a situation driven by specific industrial needs, primarily mining, and supported by the right fuel source and developing materials science in a way that just didn't exist in Heron's time.
It really highlights how invention alone isn't enough. You need the right conditions, the right problems to solve, the right resources.
Precisely. And one source draws this interesting parallel. If somehow Heron's steam principle had been developed and applied widely back then, imagine the disruption.
You might have had an ancient industrial revolution.
Maybe. And perhaps, as the source speculates, you might have even seen ancient versions of the Luddites people smashing these new machines because they were destroying livelihoods. It's pure speculation, of course, but thought-provoking.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Summing up what we've gleaned from this deep dive into the sources. Heron of Alexandria. Undeniably brilliant.
Absolutely. A genius inventor. His Aeolipile was conceptually groundbreaking, showing heat could become motion centuries early.
But it didn't spark an industrial revolution back then. Why not?
It seems like a combination of factors. One, the technical limits of the time materials like copper just weren't strong enough for powerful high-pressure engines, and maybe fuel was an issue too.
Right. And two,
And perhaps even more significantly, the socioeconomic structure of the Roman Empire. The massive reliance on cheap, abundant slave labor removed a lot of the economic incentive to develop labor-saving machines.
plus that fascinating hint of a potential conscious decision to avoid automation because of worries about unemployment and social stability.
Exactly. So while we look back now and think, wow, what a missed opportunity,
Yeah.
these sources suggest that within the actual context of ancient Rome, the Aeolipile remaining a clever device, a scientific curiosity rather than an industrial engine, actually made a certain kind of historical sense.
It fit its time, even if it feels tantalizingly ahead of its time to us.
Mm-hmm. And it leaves us with that image, doesn't it? That what if that historians love to ponder. What would history look like if the Romans, against all odds, had developed steam power? Roman legions with steam tanks, steam-powered aqueduct construction.
It's fascinating to imagine, a real reminder that technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. Its path depends so much on the world around it. So thinking about all this, what's the one thing that really stands out to you?